Hello again YouTube, and welcome back to Just Get a Tesla. My Model Y long range is dual motor, as you can just about see through all of the dirt. That means it's got a motor on the front and a motor on the rear. It's all-wheel drive. Isn't the rear-wheel drive car just as good? Because in the real world, this is rear-wheel drive most of the time. So here's the question: do you need to pay the extra for all-wheel drive? Let's find out. The principle of this video is pretty simple. Do you actually need to pay the extra for the all-wheel drive car? How often is the all-wheel drive car all-wheel drive in practice? Because from the testing that I've been doing, I've been really surprised as to just how often the car is rear-wheel drive only. So if it's mostly rear-wheel drive, is it worth the extra money when you can now buy a rear-wheel drive only car with the same range, the same battery pack, the same features as the long range? So to test this, I'm going to be using my Teslogic box and their app, which shows you graphically on the screen just how much power is being used at any given time by any of the systems in the car, including both of the motors. And if you want to get your own Teslogic box, use the referral link that's on the screen now and get a nice discount. Genuinely, this is a really useful piece of kit for me because it provides a lot of information about how the car is working, which means that I can relay it to you good people out there in YouTube land. So what we're going to do is go for a little drive. I'm going to do some sweeping main roads. I'm going to do some twisty country roads. I'm going to do some serious hill climbing. Let's put this car to the test and understand exactly what's happening with the motors. And just for a bit of context, it's 10 degrees today, it is mid-November, and the roads are quite greasy. So if ever the all-wheel drive bit is going to kick in, it'll be today. So what I'm going to do today is, as I say, drive a bit of a test route around the northern bits of Aberdeenshire, North Pole North, effectively, although we haven't got any snow yet, but I'm sure it's coming fairly soon. And this is the display that we are going to be keeping our eye on. This is the Teslogic app, and it is showing you basically what the car is doing. So the box in the middle shows you the battery, so you can see the two things in green. It is outputting to climate control over here and others, which is lighting over here. I am regenning, and you can see the rear motor has got a negative number on it. It's putting power back in, and as we come to a stop, the front motor is also on, although the front motor doesn't come on very much. And this is the interesting thing that we're going to be watching for as we go through today. How much does the front motor actually power on? So I'm going around there, 37, 38 on the rear. The front was only ever putting a couple of kilowatts of power down. Most of the power was coming from the rear motor. And as I accelerate up to speed here, it's the exact same thing. The rear motor is doing all of the work. So we're going to have a bit of A-road, I was going to say thrash, it's not thrash. We're going to have a bit of A-road driving, mostly downhill, as we head down towards Fraserburgh. And I am expecting that the rear motor is going to be doing practically all of the work as we go down here. So I'm definitely under power, but I'm not under a lot of power. What I am doing is basically sticking to the speed limit by moderating my right foot. So I'm effectively doing lift and coast. Like now, I've got no power down at all. It's showing me that I am very, very, very slightly regenning as I'm doing a little bit more now, and then a little bit of power as I'm doing now, and it's basically going to flit in between the two. But all of the time, it's going to be the left-hand side, which is the rear motor, doing the work, as opposed to the right-hand side, which is the front motor. So as we go along here, I'm also going to have the car on autopilot where I can. We will see if the active curve assist feature, which is new onto rest of world Teslas comes into effect. If you haven't seen my video on that, what have you been doing? That was a big video with an awful lot of people watching it. So go and watch that one after you've seen this one to see what that new software feature is all about. One more thing to say as well. If you're watching this and you haven't yet subscribed, please do hit the subscribe button. Something like 70% of my audience hasn't yet subscribed. If you want to see real world Tesla testing in nice parts of the world, and also wanting to understand how the car works, how the technology works, how the features work. I'm not steering, by the way. I've got my finger on the steering wheel to make sure it goes around the bend. I'm letting the car do the work. Yeah? If you want to see things like that, hit the subscribe button now before you forget at the end. Well, this is interesting. The nag has gone. If the car can see that my hand is on the steering wheel, it's not nagging. I'm not actually holding it. So all the way down the hill so far, and the rear motor is literally doing all the work. So the numbers on here tell you how much percentage of the power on this trip has been used on different things, and the rear motor has taken 88% of the power used, the front motor 1%. Okay, so an 88-to-1 ratio between the rear and the front. So an all-wheel drive car where only 1% of the power used has been used by the front motor. And we'll see if that changes and how much that changes as the roads get a little bit more interesting further along. So I've lifted off there to slow down onto the bend, and the rear motor was assisted by the front motor. The front motor kicks in reverse to regen, to pull the car back, and then as soon as you put a little bit of throttle back on to reduce the amount of regen, the front motor switches off again. So as I go along here, most of the time, and I do mean practically all the time, it's rear wheel drive only. It's only kicking in, the front motor, predominantly so far, either when I'm just setting off or when I'm wanting to slow down a lot. And that's interesting. So as we come into the village now, what we're going to do is ease off the throttle and try and slow down a little bit more progressively and see if we can stop the front motor from kicking in. And we've been successful. The front motor didn't need to kick in because I didn't lift off. Not lifting off means I am dialing in relatively low amounts of regen, which means the front motor isn't needed to slow the car down. And if it isn't needed, it isn't kicking in. So this is the end of the wider, straighter road. From here westwards for the next few miles, it's narrower and it's twistier, and we're going to do something a little bit fun. So again, I've lifted off and the front motor kicks in to give it some regen, and off we go again. So let's keep an eye as we hit some of the sillier hills and the sillier bends on that front motor on the right hand side. So we're going down here now, it says 10%. I think it gets a little bit steeper further on, but we'll see. And again, I am using regen, just lifting my foot off the throttle, and it's rear wheels all the time doing all of the regenning. The rear motor doing all the work, the front motor not coming on at all because I'm being fairly gentle with the regen. You saw it then, it flashed on very, 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 very slightly for maybe a split second and no more than that. It detected, I assume, that we needed a little bit more grip on the front, so it kicked itself in and then kicked itself off again. Nothing coming, so we can just straighten the bend. And now we're starting to climb, but it's still rear wheel drive only. this could be an interesting test because we're about to turn sharply and climb quite steeply, 12%, and this is a more than 90 degree bend. It's like 110 degrees. So let's see what it does. We're going to approach it and basically ease off and around the bend, and up we go, and there you go. The front motor has now kicked in because we need, and it's getting up to about 15 kilowatts there. Nothing compared to the 56 that we saw on the other side. So I mean, 15 versus 56, we're getting what, 20% or so power on the front versus the rear. It's not a lot, but it was there. And then as soon as the demand on the motors for torque diminishes, it switches back off again. And then we go over the top and we start to drop back down again. But we're still rear wheel drive. Even as I eased off a little bit more there was nothing off the front. Okay, let's try and... Nope. I nudged the steering over a little bit more acutely than was needed, and still nothing needed off the front. It was absolutely fine with that. Okay, we really start to drop downhill now. Let's see if there's any change in the motors. So the gradient increases to 20%. Good. Now we're talking about a hill. And yet, look at it, rear wheel drive. We've got a couple of tight bends coming up. I've lifted all the way off because I really do need to slow down, but minus 43 on the rear, minus 1.4 on the front. The front isn't really doing anything. It's kicking in, and maybe it's just providing a little bit of correction on the regen, but only a little bit. Minus 43 versus minus 1, okay? Almost all of the regenerative power there was in the rear. Even though the front kicked in, the front was doing barely anything. And now we start to climb again. And again, it's still all in the rear. What do I have to do to get this car to kick in with the front motor? Well, I've got a few ideas, and we're going to do those in a minute, so keep watching. We're coming up on the Pennon crossroads. We're not going to Pennon, we're going to Crivy, because the hill there is even crazier than the hill down towards Pennon. So we go through the crossroads and the road starts to nosedive again. Keeping an eye out, is it doing anything? And the answer is no, it's sticking with rear wheel drive. Again, rear wheel drive only. So now I've lifted off all the way and I'm actually applying the brake. We've got some on the front, but again, minus 40 something I was seeing on the rear and minus 2 on the front. So the rear motor doing almost all the work again. And now we're going to go around this bend, and I am going to give it the beans just to see how much I get the front motor to kick in. So as we come around here and we straighten and we hit a plus 17, let's just give it a bit of a whammy. Yep, the front motor kicks in, and even then, I think it was about plus 29 versus plus 60 or something on the rear. This is a steep hill, 17% gradient, and it's all on the rear. And then a little touch then as we go around the bend on the front, a little touch, nothing more than that. I've lifted all the way off just to see, and again I get a bit of front motor regen, but again it's a bit, it's not a lot. I'm a bit easier on the regen this time, and it stayed rear wheel drive only right until the end, when it puts just a hint onto the front motor. And again, the same here, it's kicked in, but it's only deploying a bit of power. Now, okay, the rear motor is a much more powerful motor than the front motor. That is true. So you would expect that the rear motor is going to do more of the work than the front motor. But when I started doing my research for this video, basically by sticking the app on and having a look, I will confess to being a little surprised as to just how rear-wheel drive biased this all-wheel drive system is. And I probably shouldn't be, because people are going to be saying, look Ian, most 4x4 systems are switchable, and that is true. My Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV with motors on both axles was rear-wheel drive on electric most of the time. Or was it? Even my Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV didn't use both axles all of the time. You actually had to put lock onto the drive system if you wanted all-wheel drive, because most of the time it would just buzz along, mainly using the front motor. That was front-wheel drive biased and not rear. This, of course, is the other way round. Perhaps one thing that is missing on this all-wheel drive system is a way to lock it. So there is no electronic diff lock or anything like that. There is no way to electronically force it into using both axles, both motors, all wheels powered. You can't force it to do that. It chooses when to do it all by itself. Now, of course, that's Tesla engineers saying, we know our vehicle, we know what's actually used. Fine, but sometimes when you have got all-wheel drive, you do want that little bit of extra reassurance if it gets slippery. Although again, these roads are quite damp and it's reasonably cool, and despite that, and going on to some interesting roads, it's still doing its thing and there's no issues with traction. So we're going to go down the hill to Crivy and back and see what it's like on the mega steep downhill and then the mega steep uphill. How do the motors perform? What do they do? So we take the spur down towards Crivy, and we have, just for a second there, we had green on one axle and yellow on the other, which suggested that one axle was providing power and the other axle was providing regen. Is that a little bit of steering going on? That's interesting. I might actually have to replay that bit right now. So, we're not going to go fast down this dead-end road, because with respect to it, there's a few passing places, and if someone's coming the other way, you might have to back up. And as you get towards this summit up here, it's basically completely blind. So we are going to go at relatively walking pace or a little bit faster as we approach it, because you might have to stop in a hurry. But even there, oh, hang on, no, we got a, look there, you see, green on one, yellow on the other. Did you see that? And again here, look, split. We're on minus on that one and front on and green on that one. So minus 0.5 it was and plus 1.5. What is going on there? How have I got the two motors doing completely different things? So this is now nosedive for the C. It says 17%, but believe me, it gets steeper than that, especially on the inside of the bend. Although I don't think we're going to get very close to the inside, because you have to go around the outside to see where on earth you're going. So this is Crivy. I love this place. Okay, both motors just kicked in briefly. So we are trundling our way down the hill. We've got minus 21 on the rear and minus 0.5 on the front. So again, the rear is doing almost all of the work to hold us back on this hill. That's not really a surprise. Walking pace around here, because it absolutely has to be. Ooh, windy. Again, the rear motor doing all the work, despite the fact that we are going down this really steep hill. It's still not needing anything off the front. Now, there isn't anywhere further to go, so what we need to do is a Spinderella. And we're going to do that here. And we're going to do it here mainly because it's the most ludicrous and dangerous. That is an open drop off the seawall. Okay, backing it up, and we've got a bit of action on both motors. But again, it's still mostly the one on the rear that's doing the work. I think that'll do. A bit of shunty is going to be required. The only problem with the Model Y is that it's got the same turning circle as a super tanker. Ooh, only now the front motor. See, only the front. That's the first time I've seen that at all. I'm backing up and the front motor is doing all the work. So as we go back up the hill, let's see what we get. A bit of both, but it is only a bit on the front as usual. Plus 29 on the back, plus 0.5 on the front. Yeah, and it says 17%, but the inside of that bend is a bit more than 17%. Plus 5 we got on the front then, and plus 25 on the rear. So okay, that was a little bit more front bias than it has been, but it's still only a fraction of the rear. And then as we basically walk up here, let's see if I lift off. Nope, oh yes, just about. Look, we got that split again. That's weird. One motor going forwards, the other motor regenerating. What is that about? Back to this bend where you just cannot see around it at all. So we got the split again here, green and yellow. We had the rear motor providing traction, and look again, rear motor providing traction, front motor regenning. So is that it pulling it round a bend? But at the last bit there, it wasn't really on a bend. And okay, it was only a little bit of regen on the front while the rear was pushing. But I mean, what on earth is that? How do you get it where the motors are split, one of them providing traction and the other one providing regeneration at the same time? I don't understand that at all. So we've got both going there just to pull us around that, basically a bend on a gradient, but plus 33 plus 0.5. There's very, very little on the front, despite the fact that it felt that it needed a little bit of it, and it is only a little bit. I get, yeah, did you see that? We had green on the front and yellow on the rear. What is going on? And it was only a little bit of green, it was like 0.1, but that's it, you know, it's still doing it. So we go banging into there, and again we had a bit of motor split. I'm going to call it that, motor split, where one motor is giving power and the other motor is taking regeneration. Motor split. Okay, this section is proper twisty. So I've got to lift off basically just to get enough regen to slow me down as we go around here. We'll need that for a minute. All the regen is in the rear at the moment. I wonder if we can get it to do anything with the front motor by maybe going slightly quicker into some of these bends or accelerating through the bend. Maybe we'll try that. So let's get around here. Put a little bit more power down. I can feel that it's slippery, okay? It's definitely a little bit greasy, but it still didn't give me any front motor action until I really started to push it a little bit too quick. Not dangerously quick, I mean, I'm still going pretty slowly, but it's let's try and get it so that it's really having to work. And only at that point does the front motor kick in, and even then, it's only there briefly. Wow. So we'll just press on a little bit quicker. And again, we are in the green on the rear all the way, with nothing at all happening on the front. So here's the question that we now need to ask. And it's basically this. What is the point of the all-wheel drive long-range car when you can have a rear-wheel drive or long-range car for less money? This is the all-wheel drive, but as we've seen, practically speaking, in the real world, it might as well just be the rear-wheel drive. It is not using the front motor hardly at all. The only time it will use the front motor is if it needs to lay down significant amounts of power or significant amounts of regen. There's nothing behind me, so we're going to absolutely bang it now away, and both motors come on, and the front motor, that is the first time that it's giving any real power, okay? The rest of the time, it comes on, it goes off, it goes on, it goes off. It only really stays on if you're giving it the beans, and I do mean the full beans. You know, I can accelerate decently fast, and I'm still only on rear wheel drive. So what is the point in the all-wheel drive car for most users? I'm here at the North Pole, so from my perspective, I want all of the traction that I can get, because as this winter goes on, we are going to get decent amounts of snow and ice. If you are in more temperate southern climates, so anywhere that's not 57 degrees north as I am, you're probably not going to get lots of snow and ice. So for most of the time, for most people, if you spend the extra money on the all-wheel drive car, you are basically hauling a motor around that isn't being used. For most users, I have to ask the question, do you need the front motor? If you want all the power in the world, great, go for all-wheel drive. It makes the thing accelerate very quickly. If you live in places with slippery roads, then again, go for the all-wheel drive car. I suspect as this winter goes on, I am going to see the front motor go green more and more. And if you subscribe to the channel, you're going to see me testing that. But this is mid-November, so before it gets particularly cold and before we get any of the ice and snow, I just wanted to lay down a benchmark. How much is the front motor of my car used? And the answer is hardly at all. So, do you need to spend the extra money when the car is basically the same? The long range car is the long range car, whether you've got one motor or whether you've got two motors, with one exception. And I saw this on Reddit and I had to go and check it out because I was a little bit astonished. This is the entertaining bit. Americans, you're getting ripped off by Tesla, because any Model Y cars that are built in America, if you opt for the rear-wheel drive only long-range car, you get a 7-speaker, no subwoofer audio system. It calls it custom audio, but there's another word I can think of beginning with C, right, and ending in Y, that it is. 7 speakers and no subwoofer. The same car anywhere else in the world, and I have checked Europe, I have checked the Middle East, I've checked Australia, the same car anywhere else in the world has the same premium audio system as this car. So, for whatever reason, North American shoppers of Tesla do not get the same car as the rest of the world. You get an inferior one. And that surely isn't something that happens very often. So how do I sum this up? Well, I think for me, the rear-wheel drive long-range Model Y is probably now the choice for most people. It does almost everything that the all-wheel drive version does. It is very quick, it is very long-legged in terms of range, and it drives exactly the same as the more expensive all-wheel drive car almost all of the time. So unless you really need the additional range, unless you really need that additional bit of traction or that extra burst of speed that you get from having a motor on the front as well as the one on the back, then for most people it's probably the car to get. And don't forget that in almost everywhere in the world, the rear-wheel drive car is exactly the same on the inside as the all-wheel drive car. It's only in seemingly North America where the rear-wheel drive car has got some cheaper features such as custom audio, which has got half of the speakers removed for no particular reason. So it's your money, it's your choice. I know what I'd get. For me, living here in Scotland, All-wheel drive is a level of reassurance that I'm willing to pay extra for, but for practically everywhere else, you probably can save the money. The rear-wheel drive car, for me, is now the one to get for most users. And on that interesting note, where the most expensive and the most powerful isn't necessarily the best, we're going to leave it there. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. As I say, there is going to be more testing of all-wheel drive as we go through the winter. Please share the video if you've got people who are interested in what the differences are, and I will see you, them, and everybody else back here very soon on Just Get a Tesla.